You know that moment when you're looking at your account balance after paying all your monthly obligations and there's actually money remaining? Not a lot, but enough that you need to make a decision about where it goes. And you're sitting there wondering if you should throw it at your student loan balance or your car note, or if you should finally start that investment account you've been thinking about for 2 years. Maybe you've spent entire evenings running calculations, trying to figure out which choice will leave you better off in 20 years. Or perhaps you've asked 3 different people and received 4 different opinions, leaving you more confused than when you started. One person insists you should eliminate all debt before investing a single dollar. Another swears that investing early is the only path to wealth. A third suggests some complicated hybrid approach that requires a spreadsheet and a degree in mathematics to execute properly. Here's what most financial advice won't acknowledge about this decision. There's no universal correct answer, but there are principles that can guide you toward the choice that makes sense for your specific situation. Understanding the actual mathematics, the psychological factors, and the opportunity costs involved changes everything about how you approach this question that could determine the difference between comfortable retirement and working indefinitely. My name is Anderson, and I help people understand that financial decisions aren't just mathematical equations, but complex choices involving risk, psychology, and life circumstances. If you're tired of getting conflicting advice about whether to pay off debt or invest, and want to understand how to actually make this decision for yourself, stay with me through this. Subscribe if this kind of grounded financial thinking helps you navigate these choices more clearly. Now, when you think about this debt versus investing question, what framework do you use? Do you feel like debt is this weight you need to eliminate before you can start building wealth? Or do you view low-interest debt as a tool that lets you build wealth faster by leveraging borrowed money? Or maybe you're just confused because both arguments sound reasonable and you don't know who to believe. Here's the contrarian insight that's going to change how you think about this. When you pay off debt, you're essentially earning a guaranteed return equal to that debt's interest rate. Think about the mathematics here. If you have a loan charging you 18% interest and you pay it off, that's equivalent to earning a risk-free 18% return on your money. Try finding that kind of guaranteed return anywhere in the investment world. You won't. This is where things become genuinely interesting. The stock market has historically averaged approximately 10% annually over extended periods. Notice I said historically and over extended periods, because the market doesn't operate on your personal timeline or care about your financial needs. Some years it delivers 30% returns. Other years, it takes away 40% of your money just to keep things unpredictable. So here's the question that determines hundreds of thousands of dollars over your lifetime. Does it make sense to pay off debt with a 4% interest rate when you could potentially earn 10% in the market? The mathematics seems straightforward. 4% guaranteed versus 10% potential equals invest the money and capture the difference. But if mathematics were the only factor in financial decisions, we'd all be making optimal choices consistently. We're not. The reality is that risk changes everything about this calculation. When you pay down debt, you're receiving that guaranteed return with zero possibility of loss. There's no market crash that can eliminate the interest you're no longer paying. There's no economic recession that can reduce the psychological benefit of having one less monthly obligation. Investing, on the other hand, involves accepting that your money might grow substantially or might lose value, potentially for years at a time. The returns can be spectacular, but they come with genuine possibility of watching your account balance decrease while you continue needing to make debt payments with money you don't have because your investments are underwater. Let me show you what this looks like with actual numbers, because nothing clarifies financial concepts like seeing real dollars working over time. Imagine you have a mortgage for $300,000 at 4.5% interest over 30 years. Your monthly payment sits around $1,520, and you've managed to accumulate an extra $800 monthly that you could either apply to the mortgage or invest. If you decide to attack that mortgage with the extra $800 monthly, you'll eliminate the debt in approximately 16 years instead of 30. That's cutting your debt timeline nearly in half. You'll also avoid paying roughly $110,000 in interest over the original loan term. That's substantial money that stays in your accounts instead of flowing to the lender. But here's where the mathematics becomes genuinely interesting. Once you're debt-free in that 16 years, you now have both your original extra $800 plus your former mortgage payment of $1,520 to invest each month. That's $2,320 monthly flowing into investments for the remaining 14 years of our 30-year comparison. Running those numbers at that historical 10% average return, you'd accumulate approximately $1 million in your investment account. Subtract the interest you avoided by eliminating the mortgage early, and you're looking at roughly $900,000 in total wealth after 30 years. That sounds impressive until you examine what happens with the alternative approach. What if you make minimum mortgage payments and invest that extra $800 from the beginning? This is where compound growth starts demonstrating its power. By investing that $800 monthly for the complete 30 years while making minimum mortgage payments, your investment account grows to approximately $1.9 million. Yes, you'll pay about $240,000 in mortgage interest over those 30 years. But even accounting for that interest expense, you're still positioned with approximately $1.6 million in total wealth. That's a difference of roughly $700,000 between the two strategies. $700,000, that's the kind of money that transforms retirement from existing to actually living comfortably. Now, before you rush to dump every available dollar into index funds, remember these calculations assume numerous things proceeding according to plan. They assume the market delivers that historical average, which it might not during your specific timeline. They assume you maintain discipline for 30 years without panic selling during inevitable crashes. And they assume you don't encounter major life disruptions, forcing you to liquidate investments prematurely. The mortgage example actually represents one of the more dramatic cases in this debt versus investment decision. Mortgages typically offer some of the lowest interest rates available to regular consumers, often barely exceeding inflation rates. This makes them what some people call strategic debt. If such a concept can exist, money borrowed at such reasonable rates that informed investors actually prefer maintaining these loans indefinitely. But here's something most people don't consider when running these mental calculations. Inflation quietly works in your favor when you carry fixed rate debt. That mortgage payment of $1,520 feels substantial today, but in 15 years it's going to feel modest. Why? Because inflation increases the cost of everything except your mortgage payment, which remains frozen at the original amount. Think about what you paid for basic goods 10 years ago versus today. Your mortgage payment doesn't receive that notification about price increases. In 20 years, you'll be making that same $1,520 payment with money that's worth substantially less than currently. You're essentially repaying the loan with devalued currency, which is completely legal, and the lender accepted these terms when originating the loan. This is why some financial strategists become genuinely enthusiastic about 30-year mortgages. They're not just borrowing money, they're borrowing today's valuable dollars and repaying with tomorrow's cheaper dollars. Meanwhile, assets you invest in tend to maintain pace with or exceed inflation, so you're effectively playing both sides of inflation to your advantage. But let's reconsider this mortgage example because not all debt operates equivalently. If we're discussing credit card debt, the entire conversation transforms immediately. Credit cards don't negotiate with interest rates. They'll charge 18, 22, sometimes 28% interest, which represents financial extraction at industrial scale. When dealing with high-interest debt, the mathematics becomes unambiguous. There's no investment strategy that can consistently and safely exceed credit card interest rates. Sure, you might occasionally find exceptional investment opportunities, but you're substantially more likely to experience losses than consistently beat those credit card rates. This is where mathematical optimization becomes straightforward. you attack highest interest rate debts first, regardless of balance amounts, because mathematically, it preserves the most wealth. It's not as psychologically satisfying as eliminating small balances first, but your future financial position will benefit from being logical rather than emotional. Student loans occupy this peculiar middle territory in the debt landscape. They often carry moderate interest rates somewhere between mortgages and credit cards, plus they sometimes include tax deductions that effectively reduce your actual interest rate. Some student loans sit at 3 or 4% interest, positioning them in that ambiguous zone where investing might make mathematical sense. But here's where student loans become complicated. Unlike mortgages, you can't deduct the interest beyond certain income thresholds. And unlike your house, your education can't be surrendered if circumstances deteriorate, which sounds beneficial until you realize it also means you can't liquidate it to eliminate the debt. Car loans present another fascinating case study. Most car loans range between 5 and 9% interest depending on credit profiles and negotiation. But here's the element about cars that changes the calculation. They're depreciating assets, losing value continuously. So when making extra payments on car loans, you're essentially paying additional money to own something becoming less valuable daily. From purely mathematical perspective, it often makes more sense to invest extra money and allow the car to depreciate naturally while your investments hopefully appreciate. Let me introduce you to someone I'll call Rebecca, because her experience illustrates these principles clearly. Rebecca was 32 with a mortgage at 4%, a car loan at 6%, student loans at 5%, and $800 monthly. She could allocate either toward debt or investing. She felt overwhelmed by the debt, psychologically burdened by multiple monthly obligations. Every financial advisor she consulted gave different recommendations. One insisted she should eliminate all debt before investing. Another suggested investing immediately to capture compound growth. A third recommended some complex prioritization system she couldn't quite follow. Rebecca made a decision based on understanding her actual situation rather than following someone else's universal rule. She recognized her car loan at 6% represented her highest interest rate on secured debt. She kept her mortgage because the 4% rate was lower than expected investment returns. She maintained minimum payments on student loans because the 5% rate was borderline, and the psychological relief of eliminating the car payment appealed to her. She allocated her extra $800 monthly entirely to the car loan, eliminating it in 18 months. Then she took that freed up car payment of $350 plus her original $800 and began investing $1,200 monthly. Over the following 15 years, this approach allowed her to build substantial investment accounts while maintaining manageable debt on her mortgage and gradually diminishing student loans. Rebecca's choice wasn't the mathematically optimal strategy. Pure optimization would have suggested investing everything immediately since her debt rates were below expected returns. But it was the right strategy for her because she could maintain it psychologically and it provided the behavioral satisfaction she needed to stay committed long term. This brings us to something that fundamentally changes this entire decision: your timeline and life stage. If you're 28 with stable employment and decades until retirement, you can probably accept more investment risk. Market crashes sting, but you have substantial time to recover. You can tolerate volatility and potentially capture those higher long-term returns. But if you're 57 and seriously contemplating retirement, those market crashes impact you differently. You don't have decades to recover from major downturns. Suddenly, the guaranteed return of eliminating debt appears substantially more attractive than the potential volatility of market investments. Your risk tolerance isn't solely about age. It's about your complete financial situation and honestly, your personality. Some people sleep substantially better knowing they're debt-free, even if it means potentially sacrificing investment gains. Others remain comfortable carrying low-interest debt if it means maximizing investment potential. There's also your cash flow situation to consider. Debt payments reduce monthly flexibility, which becomes genuinely problematic if you lose employment or face unexpected expenses. Having investments is valuable, but they're not as liquid as having margin in your monthly budget. You can't pay your utility bill with unrealized gains. This brings us to an often overlooked middle approach, executing both simultaneously. Instead of choosing between debt elimination and investing, you can divide your extra money between both strategies. Maybe you allocate half toward debt reduction and half toward investments. It's not as mathematically optimal as concentrating entirely on one strategy, but it hedges your position and might provide psychological comfort. Here's another factor most people completely ignore: the emergency fund reality. Before even contemplating whether to pay debt or invest, you need cash reserves sitting available, earning minimal returns. I understand that watching money earn essentially nothing while inflation diminishes its value feels unproductive. But here's the thing: if you lack emergency reserves and your vehicle fails, what happens to your debt elimination strategy or investment portfolio? You're either withdrawing money from investments at potentially the worst moment or adding more debt to the pile you're attempting to eliminate. 3 to 6 months of expenses in accessible savings isn't exciting, but it's the foundation preventing your entire financial strategy from collapsing. Let's discuss something that genuinely matters here: the tax implications most people discover too late. When you eliminate debt, especially mortgage debt, you might be surrendering some tax benefits. Mortgage interest is often tax deductible, meaning the government effectively subsidizes part of your housing costs. Eliminate that mortgage early, and you lose that deduction. But before becoming too enthusiastic about maintaining debt for tax purposes, remember that receiving a tax deduction means spending money to save money. It's like being excited about a sale when purchasing something you don't actually need. You're still spending to receive that savings. Investment taxation presents its own complexity. When investing in taxable accounts, you'll eventually pay capital gains taxes on profits. Long-term capital gains rates are often lower than ordinary income rates, so that 10% return might be closer to 8% after taxes, which changes your debt versus investment mathematics. This is where tax-advantaged accounts become transformative. If your employer offers retirement account matching, contributing enough to capture the full match is essentially free money. It's your employer saying, for every dollar you save, I'll contribute 50 cents. Only someone actively avoiding wealth would decline free money. So here's the conclusion: whether you should eliminate debt or invest isn't a question with universal answers. It depends entirely on your circumstances, your debt interest rates, your investment timeline, and your psychological capacity to maintain the strategy. High interest debt? Attack it aggressively. Low interest debt? Consider maintaining it while investments work for you. Either way, stop overthinking and start executing. Because the biggest financial mistake is spending so much time planning the perfect strategy that you never actually implement any strategy at all. Your future self isn't expecting perfection. Your future self is hoping you'll make reasonably good decisions consistently over time. And if you can provide that, you'll look back grateful you started when you did, rather than waiting for certainty that never arrives.